south of the border, down Mexico way. That's where I fell in love when the stars above came out to play. And now as I wander...
Hello there, all you expat wannabes. I'm Johnny Mueller, and you're listening to the Expat Files, Living in Latin America, the show that tells you just what it's like to live, work, play, and or retire down here in Latin America. It's a mix of the good, the bad, the ugly, and the great, and it's all right here, so let's get started. All right, fellow gringos, expats, gonnabes, and wannabes. This is the January 1st, 2021 show. And I figure it'll take me 2 or 3 months before I'm not making the mistake of writing 2020 instead of 21. How about you? All right, now from the People Just Don't Listen department. How about this for a boots on the ground story? I went to a Christmas party. Everyone showed up with masks and took them off immediately when they got to the party and sat right next to each other. Hugged and smooched and made all kinds of physical contact. This is Latin America, you know. You get that double-barreled cheek pump. Well, not outside in public anymore, but you do still get it when you walk into somebody's house. So much for anti-social distancing, huh? Anyway, I'm at this party. I'll bet there was 30 people there and food for 150. That's how Latin parties go. And, of course, I was the only gringo there. You know, I'm living off the gringo tourist trail, and I don't feel bad about that at all. Of course, I would if I didn't speak any Spanish. Man, you wouldn't believe how Latinos treat you when you're the only gringo in the house. It's the gringo advantage on steroids. That's really what it is. If you don't believe me, come on down and see for yourself. So anyway, this beautiful Latina, I didn't know her. She must have been about 27. She came and sat right next to me on the couch. Not because I'm such a magnetic and good-looking guy. Actually, I'm nothing to write home about. But the couch right next to me was the only space available. By the way, up in the States, I always considered myself a 6 on the 10 scale for looks, not personality. As for personality, sometimes I'm a 1 and sometimes I'm a 10. Depends who you ask. And for any of you who've looked deeper into that subject or read about it in a book somewhere, you know when you rate or other people rate your looks, personality, intelligence, talent, etc., you know nearly 100% of people will rate themselves a point or two higher than the general public will. That's why when reporters on the street ask the question, how do you rate yourself intelligence-wise, almost everyone rates themselves above average. But, you know, that's completely impossible because half the world's below average, right? Which is an awful scary reality. That means every other person you meet on the street is below average. And, most likely, working for government. I know, I've said that before on this show. But it is one of those statistics that just doesn't seem right. That every other person you pass is dumber than you are. Oh, and then there's the fact that there's average as we see it in the first world and average as you see it here in Latin America. For example, the average person's house or the average person's car here in Latin America, when you say the word average or promedio in Spanish, it's a faulty premise from the get-go. Well, we should be talking apples and apples, but we're not. In other words, your definition of average and a Latino's definition of average are two different things. So anyway, this beautiful girl sits next to me, and she had this strangely sad look on her face. I said, hey, this is Christmas. How come you're not smiling? What happened? Your dog die? Which apparently is not a saying they use at all here in Latin America. I found that out in about 3 seconds. So she gave me the deer in the headlights look and said, excuse me, I don't have a dog. She said it nicely. Girls are extra nice and polite here in Latin America. Even when a gringo says something stupid or unintelligible. Like, for example, what happened? Did your dog die? And of course, since you've got that gringo advantage, they always cut you a tremendous amount of slack. No matter how far you've lodged your foot in your mouth. Then she said, I don't have a dog, but I've got a bird. Then I thought, oh no, I'm not going to go there because I just hate talking about Latinos or Latinas that own birds. You longtime listeners have heard me say, one of the cruelest things you could do to a bird is put it in a cage. Especially those big, beautiful tropical birds that have huge wingspans. Putting them in a cage, well, that's just stupid. But I digress. Wow. Just 4 minutes into the first show of the new year in 2021, and already I'm digressing. So anyway, you know, we're sitting there and you get to talking, and she said, I'm having a pretty bad Christmas. And I said, yeah, you don't look too happy. What's up? And I'm thinking maybe someone in the family has COVID or is in the hospital or something bad happened. And it did, only I never would have guessed. She said, just that morning, someone stole her cell phone. She got robbed. Now, I'll tell you, looking at a Latina, especially when she's decked out or at a party or something, You just can never tell if she's lower middle class, upper middle class, or a wealthy, entitled child of rich parents. That you have to find out by talking with them. By looking at them, you almost can never tell, because they always are decked out. Even middle and lower class Latinas and Latinos might have a genuine article of designer clothing, or 2 or 10. Plus, a lot of fake designer stuff too, but you see, dressing up and looking good is a priority with Latinos and Latinas. Much more so than the gringo crowd. Oh, and you definitely can't tell the socioeconomic bracket of a Latina by her cell phone, unless it's a really low-end piece of trash like I use. Because one of their number one priorities is to have the best, latest and greatest iPhone, even if they're on a pay-as-you-go plan that could last for years. And as a second choice, if they just can't swing an iPhone, the high-end, latest, greatest Samsung. In other words, you can't judge a Latina by her phone. Oh, and as far as smartphones and Latinos, Latin men aren't as particular about having the latest, greatest phone. Must be a guy thing. Same thing with gringos and expats. For Latinos, they have to have a pretty decent one, but they're not as phone-obsessed as Latinas are. Oh, and remember, there's a huge black market for high-end phones here in Latin America. Actually, it's more accurate to call it a gray market. In fact, it's so out in the open, you can go on OLX.com, that's the Craigslist for Latin America, and find a number of absolutely brand new in-the-box high-end phones for sale at cut-rate prices, 50, 60, and 70% of the retail price if you were going to buy one legitimately. And, of course, all of them say they'll give you a 30-day guarantee, but that's just a come-on. Where do you think all those phones come from? So anyway, I'm sitting with this girl who had just been robbed. Of course, she told me how it happened. Here's how it went down. She was driving in a nice high-end business district. There was lots of traffic, broad daylight. She stopped for a red light. She was texting. A guy with a motorcycle pulled up, stuck his hand in the window, grabbed the phone, and took off. And it was the latest, greatest iPhone, too. She only had it about 2 months. And I said, wait a minute, you say he stuck his hand through your window? I said, you mean you had your window down? She said, yeah. And I said, what kind of car you have? She said a 2014 Toyota Corolla, which means for sure she's upper middle class. Even though to people up in the States, they might consider that middle class or lower middle class. Not because it's a Corolla, but because it's 7 years old. But down here, if it's in good condition, definitely she's upper middle class. Then I said to her, why in the world would you have your windows down? She said, because I was smoking a cigarette. Uh-huh. And to me, that said it all. You see, smoking is kind of a cool, faddish thing to do with the upper middle class, younger adult generation. And I just had to ask that nagging question. How many times have you had your cell phone stolen? She said, 4 times. Yep, that's right. They never learn. Then I said, what about that app that helps you find a stolen phone? She didn't even know about it. Had no idea such a thing even existed. Here she had the most expensive iPhone, worth surely over $1,000. And she was clueless how to track it if it got stolen. I mean, really, that's one of the most advantageous things about having an iPhone. They have that tracking app. But of course, she didn't buy an official registered iPhone from a dealer. It figures she bought her phone from the gray market. That means previously stolen and unblocked, and now someone stole the stolen phone that she bought. That's kind of the typical chain of events when it comes to high-end phones here in Latin America, and one of the reasons I don't have one. Besides the fact, the more expensive the phone, the more ways and means to track you. And it's stories like that makes us gringos and expats, when we first come down anyway, makes us think and generalize that Latinos are just sort of not ready for prime time. We sort of generally downgrade their intelligence. Many of us are thinking they're not so very cognitively gifted, you might say. And many gringos and expats think Latin America is third world because there's a lack or shortage of brain power. Picture Washington, D.C., where everyone spoke Spanish. But then you find the longer you live here, that's not true at all. There's some very brilliant Latinos. However, they've got some fatal flaws, just as first world people have fatal flaws too. And one of them is they're absolutely addicted to credit. They never save. They're always putting on the dog, and they have to look good everywhere they go, which is not in itself a flaw at all, except when you're decked out and putting on the dog all the time. Nope, the trick is you don't want to be living or walking through a dingy neighborhood with a real Rolex and real gold jewelry. And you don't want to have a nice car if you don't have a protected parking place for it. Yet when you drive through certain iffy, crappy, and dingy neighborhoods, you'll see nice cars parked on the street everywhere, which is a bad move and asking for trouble. And Latinos who do that know it's not the right thing to do. but their sense of looking good all the time and their sense of fashion and the you are what you wear or you are what you drive mentality is so strong it overrides, supersedes any of the other more logical and cautious measures that really should be the number one priority. It's safe to say the phrase low profile, just like the word maintenance, is not much on the radar here in Latin America. I mean, look, how else can you explain the fact that practically every adult Latina has had her phone stolen, often multiple times, and it's always a very expensive phone, too. I mean, look, don't you think that the ease of being able to buy a stolen phone or a gray market phone would be a strong motivation not to have a high-end phone? Look, everyone down here knows the buying and selling of stolen phones and unblocking them is a huge business here. Meanwhile, fashion, putting on the dog, and pretending you have money always seems to override the natural impulse to be cautious. So looking fashionable and cool and showing off your wealth, whether you've got it or not, versus the risk of getting robbed is a balancing act. I repeat, Latinos and Latinas have no desire to maintain a low profile. It's not in their culture, it's not in their psyche, it's not even on the radar. Man, I can't tell you how many times a Latina has said to me, Johnny, you've got no rings, no chains, no bling. Why not? You can afford it. You're a gringo. And for that, I've been called a tacaño, meaning cheapskate in Spanish. Remember that word, tacaño. If you hear it, that means someone's calling someone else a cheapskate. Now, that's not to say up in the States, Americans don't buy a lot of bling, show off, and put on the dog, too. I think most native-born Americans, anyway, once they've been robbed, they generally will take enough precautions to make sure that never happens again. The proof of that? Well, let me ask you, do you know anybody who's had their cell phone stolen 3 times? How about 2 times? Well, I've known dozens of Latinos and mostly Latinas who have. I know what you're thinking. Lots of you gringos and expats up there have the latest model, Samsung, iPhone, LG, whatever, and you're wondering about bringing it down. Well, again, I'm not saying you shouldn't buy one if you can afford one. The thing is, as a gringo or foreigner, you're sticking to the more upscale, nicer areas. You're living in a better neighborhood. You're not standing in line waiting for the subway or chicken bus. And I don't think, well, I hope anyway, you're not driving around with your windows down texting away. In that case, I've got no sympathy for you. And that's exactly what I told that young Latina. I said, I know it's sad and it's a bad time for it to happen, Christmas. But you know what? You asked for it. She agreed. She didn't argue with me. But you know what was going through her head? She was thinking about what her next step would be, the ways and means to move on up and get another iPhone. She said she was going to buy a used cheap phone for the time being until she could afford to move on up, whatever crazy number they're up to now. And to me, in the past life, I was an engineer, and I'm always thinking, as people keep on moving on up to the next, latest, greatest iPhone or Samsung, whatever, what is that new model doing that the old model didn't? Nothing. Nada. Yeah, right, like the average guy on the street needs a camera with more gigapixels than the Hubble telescope. And that's where we're at right now. But you knew that already, right? Oh, and by the way, for you listeners out there who smoke cigarettes, here in Latin America, they've got their own brands and the well-known U.S. brands. Now, I don't smoke, but I know the local brands are around $3 a pack, and I think something like Marlboro's would be double that. Just to give you an idea how much cheaper it is down here to give yourself emphysema, or worse. Now, I know cigarettes are 2 or 3 times as much up in the States. Even worse in Canada. Oh, and by the way, the upper middle class young Latino crowd, I'd say age 20 to 35, they still think it's cool to smoke. And though, like up in the States and Canada and Europe, it's prohibited to smoke in buildings. Down here in Latin America, since most bars, restaurants, and hospitality establishments have sitting and eating areas that stretch from the indoors to the outdoors. Now, because a lot of those spaces aren't strictly 100% indoors, the smoking rules down here are much less strictly enforced. All right, enough said about that. Hey, remember last week, I think it was, I told you what my grandpa once said about work? He said, unless you were a logger, a miner, or a farmer, you don't know what work is. Well, I got an email from Jamie. He said, Johnny, that may be true, but my grandfather has a better definition of work. He says, if you've never worked a job where some body part or muscle doesn't hurt by the end of the day, you don't know what work is. Hey, I've had jobs like that. When I was going through high school and university, I had lots of skanky jobs. My worst one by far was the summer when I was the head of the dead dog crew at the Chicago Street Department. I spent a whole summer picking up dead dogs in varmints. I mean, you got to wonder, when a dog gets hit on the road or a cat is dead laying in the gutter, how come after a couple of days that roadkill is mysteriously gone? At least you hope so. Well, in the summer, after I graduated from high school and started engineering school, I was that guy, captain of the dead dog crew. Now, I don't know if I ever told this story before. I don't know if you want to hear it. After 10 years and 1,018 shows, I can't really remember if I ever told you that story. It's kind of a long one, very interesting and unique. If you want to hear it, send me an email, theexpatfiles@gmail.com, because otherwise, if I did tell that already, I don't want to blow 10 minutes here retelling it. Just know that if you ever meet me and shake my hand, you're shaking the hand that touched 2,000 dead dogs. And a variety of other dead varmints like raccoons, deer, fox, and the nastiest and skankiest of all, possums. Yuck, horrid little creatures. And I discovered that if you're coming up on a dead possum, and the sun and the light angle is just right, with that rat-like face and dirty dishwater blonde fur, you'd swear it was Hillary taking a nap. No offense, to the dead possum. Oh, and one more recent event that struck a nerve with me. Jill Biden reminds me of a Latina. Not that she looks like one, is sexy, or has any of their pizzazz. It's that thing about insisting people call her doctor, because that's the same sickness that pervades Latin America. You see, any and all Latinos who have any kind of a degree at all, even fake degrees, which can be bought down here fairly cheap. Well, you better believe that Latinos and Latinas are obsessed with titles. In fact, did you know that engineers here in Latin America are always referred to in person as ingeniero so-and-so? You can't be just plain John, Bill, or Harry the engineer. No. Here in Latin America, it's considered improper and in bad form and against tradition not to use the word engineer in front of a person's name. I'm talking about even in everyday conversation. For example, suppose you're at a power plant and there's a mechanical engineer there and 5 of his workers. If you just sit and listen to them as they're conversing, even just shooting the breeze, the workers will always use the word engineer in front of the name. You'll hear, "Isn't that right, Engineer Johnny? How's the traffic, Engineer Harry?" That's a custom you'll never hear used in the first world. Same thing goes for architects in any, even lame-ass degree. It's, "How's it going, Arquitecto Luis? Please turn on the light, Arquitecta Silvia." And again, it's something you'll never hear up in the first world. I know, it sounds so pompous and overblown. Like Jill Biden. And the worst of it for me, when a person just gets a bachelor's degree in whatever here in Latin America, that entitles you to use the term licenciado or licenciada, if it's a woman, as a title in front of your name. Now, in the States, if you get a bachelor's degree, it's like getting a high school diploma, right? In fact, there is no term like there is in Latin America for someone with a bachelor's degree. So, for example, if you're sitting in the car repair shop and the Latino guy next to you is a history teacher, let's say, when his car's ready, the mechanic will walk in and say, "All finished with your car, licenciado, it's tip-top." Believe me, it's something that takes a while to sink into your head, that a person with a mere bachelor's degree here in Latin America is kind of automatically elevated to a certain spot in society, which is okay. You get a bachelor's degree, that does set you apart a little bit. But does everyone in the world have to know that as soon as you walk into a room? It really is to us like a joke. But Latinos take that crap very seriously. However, if you, as a gringo, think you're committing a faux pas by not calling, let's say, a history teacher licenciado or licenciada, not to worry, because gringos and gringas are never expected to follow the party line. We're extranjeros, foreigners, and we don't know all those little formalities. We make lots of faux pas, and they cut us a ton of slack. However, if a Latino fails to follow that protocol in the presence of a superior being with a bachelor's degree in PE, physical therapy, or African American studies, in other words, if a Latino doesn't use that prefix of respect, licenciada or licenciado, that would be a lack of respect and an embarrassing no-no. However, friends who are professionals drop it and just call their friends by their names. Just like doctors in the States who are friends don't call each other Dr. So-and-so. As for me, when I first got down here many years ago and I saw those terms being thrown around, I thought, man, this is ridiculous. What kind of pompous BS is that? Until I realized, in a way, it all related to lag time. Because, you see, when I was a young kid in the 60s and 70s, most middle-class and lower-middle-class Americans were just starting to have kids who were graduating from college. In fact, I knew loads of American families who were so proud that little Harry, Johnny, or Mikey was the very first person in the whole family to ever get a college degree. In fact, a bachelor's degree back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s was a really big thing. I know, now it's like a high school diploma, but back then it was. In fact, back in the 60s and 70s, only about 5% of American adults had bachelor's degrees or better. And now it's 40%. Well, you see, here in Latin America, it's that lag time thing. It's like back in the 60s and 70s in the States. Less than 5% of adult Latinos have a bachelor's degree or better. So it really is a big thing to a Latin family. He instantly becomes, for lack of a better term, the fair-haired boy or girl, even though if you spot a fair-haired Latino, it's certainly a dye job. You get the point. Anyway, be prepared to be confronted with a wall of fame if you walk into any Latino's house. That would be the guy that went to college. You'll see every award and diploma he's ever got since he was 6 years old, all nicely framed in group in a sort of a wall of fame. And it doesn't matter if a guy took a 2-hour course in barroom dart throwing. You'll see that diploma hanging somewhere in the house as well. Bottom line, Latinos are nuts for awards, medals, banners, and diplomas. I guess that's why when you see a Latin military guy, he's got so much fruit on his chest, it's beyond ridiculous, like a bad joke. I mean, really, did you ever see Nicolas Maduro, the corrupt lard-ass president of Venezuela, dressed in his military uniform? The guy's never fought a battle. But he's got 700 multicolored doohickeys and gummy bears pinned to his chest. What a pathetic excuse for a human being. Meanwhile, in news from the States, the year 2021 is when new minimum wage laws kick in for a number of U.S. states, with the goal of all that minimum wage legislation for at least 20 U.S. states to raise their minimum wage to $15 an hour by 2026. So what's that got to do with Latin America? Well, listen up. California, Connecticut, Illinois, Maryland, Massachusetts, New Jersey, New York, and Florida, and D.C. already at or near $15 an hour as a minimum wage. Meanwhile, back in Latin America, me, Johnny, have a cleaning lady 2 days a week. I pay her $20 a day, not an hour, a day. She comes at 8 in the morning, leaves 6 at night. That's 10 hours, give or take, and I never set her hours. That's just how she does it. At $20 a day, and she's happy to have it. In fact, when I first hired her some months ago, I didn't pick that $20 a day number. She did. I asked her in the interview how much she wanted a day. Now, I knew the going rate for most maids and cleaning ladies, off the tourist trail that is around $15 a day. And when she said she'd like to have 20, I said, fine. And her eyes lit up because I don't think she expected me to agree to that. By the way, you have to know that most all Latinos here in Latin America know that minimum wages in the States are from 5 to 10 times as high as they are here in Latin America. And that's one of the biggest draws for the sweaty, uneducated masses to make that dangerous trip and pay the coyotes. Now, of course, Latinos don't have the kind of money coyotes charge. It's generally $5,000 to $10,000 a person to sneak them into Texas or wherever. But the thing is, you see, it seems like every city or even neighborhood here in Latin America has a facilitator, a prestamos jefe. That'd be a guy who's connected with the coyotes who lends you the money to pay them on, of course, a long-term payment plan. Now, of course, he doesn't lend just any old guy who walks through the door the money. He makes sure you at least have 3 to 5 co-signers in your family. So if you don't send back the monthly payment, he's got someone in your immediate family to squeeze. In other words, it's basically a loan shark operation. And if you don't pay the VIG, someone in your family will, or they'll get their legs broken. All that risks just because Latinos are aware of U.S. minimum wage and, of course, government benefits, which in itself is kind of strange because most illegal Latinos up in the States make less than minimum wage because, hell, they're working illegally and for cash, and contractors, etc., know that. So in reality, that $15 an hour minimum wage for an illegal alien up in the States is pretty much a pipe dream. For example, in a state where the minimum wage is $15 an hour, an illegal Latino is lucky to make $10 an hour. But down here in Latin America, the so-called American dream is a persistent myth that just won't go away. When Latinos hear through the grapevine $15 an hour government-mandated minimum wage, they think, what a dream wage. But being illegals, they almost never get that. In fact, I've noticed the very same thing in a microcosm in the Dominican Republic. The country's got a huge immigration problem, immigration of Haitians illegally. Yet nearly every construction crew is jam-packed full of Haitians. They do the dirtiest, crappiest jobs, digging trenches, mixing cement, hauling blocks, doing roofing. Boy, that's the worst. All that with the government-mandated minimum wage of around $300 a month. Yet the average Haitian makes about half of that. Off the books, cash on the barrel, of course. I saw the very same thing in Costa Rica with Nicaraguan illegals. And they're everywhere, too. They're working for half the Costa Rican minimum wage, which is around $500 a month. Now, notice the devil's in the details. I mention all the time that Costa Rica's got one of the highest costs of living in all Latin America. equal to many places in the States because of all the gringos flooding in, of course. You can figure that out by just looking at the minimum wage, $500 a month, whereas in most of the rest of Latin America, it's around $300 a month. So based on minimum wage figures, you can project ahead that the cost of living in Costa Rica is almost twice what it is most everywhere else in Latin America, with a few exceptions, like Panama, parts of Mexico, Argentina, and most all tourist destinations. And finally, if you heard the last Expat Files show, you'll know that I had to postpone my January 2021 seminar. So then what's the projected date of launch? I've been getting that question a lot lately. Well, I'm projecting that it'll be in March or April. It all depends on when countries and airports are going to drop that PCR test. You know, that most European and Asian countries are accepting that 5-minute fast-track saliva test because it's a much better test. It shows if you're contagious at that moment, and it's only from $1 to $3 a hit. And that is why the U.S. has not adopted it yet, because it's a huge moneymaker. For big pharma and the labs and the clinics and testing sites, at least $100 a crack. It's a revolting development, I know, it's sick. I mean that you've got politicians making those decisions when they can't do anything right. They can't run a single program right without just tons of graft, kickback, corruption, and intolerable inefficiencies. You've got those malignant dickheads making the rules and decisions for you. But you knew that already, right? So anyway, as soon as they approve that rapid test, or drop that brutal stick-up-your-nose PCR test completely, as many countries are starting to do right now, that's when my next Expat Insider seminar will launch once again. I'm thinking that'll be March or April. Oh, and one more thing. I'm almost positive this will be the last seminar you'll be able to attend where you don't have to have that dreaded vaccine, because it's going to be mandatory to fly, you know. It's coming. So if you're like me and are absolutely against taking that vaccine, and you're serious about getting that Plan B going, and you should be, you should seriously be thinking about signing up for my upcoming Expat Insider seminar. Oh, and this you might want to know. The people who already signed up for the seminar that was postponed, the majority did not want a refund. They re-upped. They are coming to the next one. All right, and finally, there might not be a show this coming Sunday because of the New Year's holiday and all that, but if I do have time, I'll do one. So if you hear a repeat show for Sunday, you'll know I got caught up in the New Year's festivities. Otherwise, I'll be at the mic as usual. For show number, hard to believe, 1019.
You've been listening to the Expat Files, living in Latin America. If you need some help with your own Plan B, we can schedule a one-on-one phone or Skype consult. Just send me an email, theexpatfiles@gmail.com. And if you want to get on the waiting list for my next week-long Expat Insider Seminar in Central America, where you're guaranteed to get a 2 to 5 year head start on your Plan B, send me an email, theexpatfiles@gmail.com. Nos vemos.